Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Weekly podcast. This one is episode 132, and the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/132. And I'm joined today by an old friend of the show. It's getting the band back together, Mr. Keith Knight. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing excellent, Patrick. Great to have you back, brother.
Yeah, it's so good to see you, man. And just, I guess it was with the Ruth Bader Ginsburg episode, I jumped back in the saddle, because how could I sit on the sideline during that? I mean,
Of
so
all times, yes, the great legal mind. I was glad to see you commenting more than anyone else.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And you've been busy, man. You haven't been sitting idle. Why don't you tell the audience just a little bit of what you've been up to? I saw you're on the Libertarian Institute now, right?
I am, yeah. So I will pretty much make sure to post that stuff there. I have been, just because YouTube is doing some censoring, I've been posting a lot of library and BitChute exclusives. So please subscribe to my library channel. I will send Patrick the link to have that in the show notes. I was not able to think of what I've been up to, so I actually had to pull up my channel here. I've had a number of people on recently. I'd say the best one recently was Michael Humer. I've been trying to have a conversation with him for 2 years. Finally sealed the deal on that. I thought we had a very productive discussion. Attempted to refute anarcho-communism contradiction in terms with Patrick Smith recently. So I've been trying to get out a video every 3 days or so.
Well, I've been seeing that. I mean, you've had interviews with some big people every 3 days. That's a pretty good. I mean, at this point, I guess what was keeping me back from interviewing big names, aside from the scheduling, was just being nervous. But you're an old hat now, aren't you? I mean, you just got so much experience.
I had an interview once, and I'm not going to tell people what it is. They need to watch all my interviews to find out and determine it. But it was so bad that, and it's so embarrassing, so cringy, that I go, I could never be worse than that. So I might as well give it a shot. Or, I really just think of, God, I wish I was, if I was alive in the time of Hazlitt and Mises and Rothbard and Frederick Bastiat, I'd love to get a chance to speak with them, let alone record an entire communication session. So, uh, uh, I mean, even though I do very poor every now and then, it's still worth it to have access to some of the great minds ever. Even if you do a terrible job, hey, I still got to communicate with the best of the best. So it's an easy payoff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. You know how much I think of you, man. You're just out there, kicking ass and taking names, and it's really cool to watch from the sidelines. So, but it's good to be back. One of the comments you made, I've been doing a lot of depositions lately at work, because my cases are going. But I had one deposition where I prepped the witness for like 6 hours the day before, and we got into the deposition, and he started being deposed, and everything just went out the window. I mean, it was, and at that point in time, I was like, okay, wow, that was a horrible experience, but it can't get any worse than that. So, so yeah, it's kind of the same, but yeah, and one of the reasons why I came back is because things are just so crazy that how could I not be, talking to. Have you done any shows lately just talking about current events? I know in this show, since the election's coming up, we wanted to tackle voting, but I also wanted to talk just a little bit and get your take about what's going on. And there's so many things to pick from. So
The current events are just current for like 2 days.
right.
That's the problem. By the time I record it, get it up, and BitChute's done processing, it's all new stuff. It was the Trump didn't condemn the Proud Boys. Then it was the Melania tapes. Then it was Trump has COVID. Like within 3 days,
Yeah.
it's just now, of course, in the grand scheme of the state's mass murder, mass theft, and mass kidnapping all over the planet, of course, it's nothing. But it is interesting to see how the media just goes from 0 to 60 and totally flips on the importance of different topics.
It was crazy. I watched the debate, and we had talked about doing a debate recap, but it was like, everyone's doing that. We're just gonna just comment on it maybe, but it was like, who was it? He was a mainstream media guy who was at NBC, who did this thing where they're like, it's an orange. An orange is an orange, and we're gonna say that it's an orange.
Yeah, CNN said this is an apple.
Yes,
Uh,
yeah.
People are going to tell you it's a banana, but it's an apple.
Well, I felt like after the debate, when all the talking heads got on, I saw what I saw with my own eyes and heard what I heard with my own ears. But it felt like they got on, and to make that same analogy, there were a bunch of bananas sitting on the counter, and they got on and they were just talking, orange this and orange that. And it's Orwellian. I mean, it's just, I know that term is kind of cliched and overused, but holy crap.
Well, yeah, I mean, my favorite moment by far is Biden goes, what we need is we need testing, number one, to number three, we need, and as Trump is talking, he goes, and by the way, Chris, by the way, you missed number two. Just in the middle of his own sentence. So you just get those gems like that. And I gotta say, like, when people are watching that, do you know you're watching something that involves no intellectual depth? I mean, like the average person, like if you watch a Soho Forum debate and then watch that, I mean, can you really compare those two? I mean, I don't know. Richard Epstein and Michael Humer had a debate, or anytime, Corey DeAngelis debates someone on school choice. To watch that then see and then see this presidential debate. I mean, isn't the ideal that these are the best of the best? We all get together for years and then put our best person forward, and then they have this duel. It's like the weakest of the weak is how sort of voting and democratic societies end up pushing people to the top, because that's who they have to appeal to. What's he going to talk about? Rent control and, selective service being code for slavery?
Right. Well, it had the effect of, I know there were a lot of people in my personal life just kind of shaking their heads collectively, and I know Joe Jorgensen's website crashed a few times the next day. Did you hear about that?
No, I saw that there was a post of number of people who searched a libertarian candidate is like this until the debate night, and then it just shot up drastically. That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I certainly hope people come across my interview with her, because I felt like that was, I really tried to be productive in our conversation. I thought she did a fine job, but gosh, when they mentioned something like it's the two-party duopoly and these are the people that created the mess, I don't feel like that gets to the heart of the issue, which is what I tried to avoid in my interview. Because I feel like, well, then why don't they just go to the Green Party? And what's wrong with politics at all? We just need to get more involved and give them more power to represent us. So I hope that when people find her, they come across some of her good works.
Yeah, and that's maybe kind of the joy about doing what we do, is that you can just call them up, and things are, libertarian personalities are relatively accessible. So you can call someone up, you have questions, and you can just have a real conversation. That's really cool. So what do you think is going to happen? I mean, things change every single day. Was Trump getting COVID the October surprise, do you think, or is there more?
So I think October surprise actually means people hold on to something until October. So I think the October surprise that they wanted was the Melania tapes, because they actually came out in October, but those were trending for like an hour and a half, because it was a few hours later Trump got COVID, which made me wonder. I wonder if he really has it, or if he just wants to silence. Oh, and then before even the Proud Boys thing, there was, oh my God, I just lost it. Before the Trump taxes. That
Right.
was huge.
Yeah.
They've been talking about that since 2016.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about, income taxes versus how much he paid in corporate versus property taxes. But just to see how this sort of silenced everything else, I think it's a blessing for Trump. I think it's going to be a net benefit for Trump. It's going to be, yeah, this thing I told you wasn't too bad, and it's okay if people get it. Well, I got it, and I'm okay. It's going to be the ability to see something that the statistics actually show, which I think is more than 99% survival rate. So people can't process the 99% number, but when they see old man Trump got it, he's okay. Okay, well, maybe we shouldn't have shut down the economy.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I haven't even talked about it on the show, and I don't a lot of people have said a lot of things about it, but it's just, I can't believe every day. I can't believe how long it's been, and I can't believe how upset people are. I mean, people are going nuts. You can't get a therapist in my area, you know?
Dude, I know I had a therapist tell me on it was like, November of 2016. She goes, Keith, I have people coming and crying on my couch about the election. I go, really? But dude, that goes to show you how the media mind control and this Trump derangement syndrome really can get you. So now that it's been 4 years and it hasn't been the terrible thing that, they were warning us about, turns out Trump's more or less as evil as any other president. So they really focus on kids in cages. Well, according to the Arizona Republic, that started in the year 2014. We know this because the published picture was in 2014 and the article was published. So it's not even like I have a feeling it was happening. It was already occurring. So then they really have to harp on BLM. Yeah, turns out, according to Roland Fryer, black professor at Harvard, blacks are not shot out of proportion to the amount of crime that they commit, just like men are killed more by the police. They commit most of the crime. You get examples like Kelly Thomas and Duncan Lemp, who get no airtime. But when it fits the narrative, they will have a black suspect or a black victim get a lot of attention, which of course they deserve, but it should be distributed equally, I think. When you see that nothing that they said came to fruition, it's amazing that they've been able to keep up the hysteria. So it was, trans and blacks and women are all gonna, go to hell within the next 4 years. Then he called their bluff and then won. So it's like, all right, let's see what the next 4 years have. And then it was nothing. I mean, Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court didn't even vote on a abortion issue. So yeah, it shows that the hysteria is just so embedded. And out of the hundreds of millions of TDS havers, so few was, well, I guess I was wrong.
Right. Yeah, they don't really stop and think and kind of analyze their own actions. I mean, at least for me. So I haven't talked about this on the show, but when COVID first happened, I was, it was scary. Like, they were bringing in ships to New York City to treat people, and I had a young child at the time, and I was startled. I thought that, of course, they shouldn't mandate lockdowns and they shouldn't do anything like that, but maybe it'd be a good idea to voluntarily do these things at the very beginning. And I was thinking about it, and then it was a 2-week shutdown to flatten the curve. And then it very, very quickly, to me, of course, I always had my eye open for shenanigans because we expect that. But it very quickly became very apparent to me that this was all a big ruse.
Yeah, so it's always hard to determine if this was a planned demic or something like that. But I mean, all you have to do is know that they constantly capitalize off any situation. So even though this could be the ultimate reason that we need no FDA, so we have total competition, so we have total investment, we have more innovation in medicine, because there might be a pandemic. We need an innovative, vibrant medical industry. You could easily make that argument just as much as you could, well, we need the state to increase its power. So yet the fact that they're always able to pull people to the side of increasing reliance on the state just shows you that whether, it is a plandemic or they just took advantage of it. I mean, look, all of the governors and all of the politicians and all the media pundits could not have been in on this. They just capitalized on it immediately.
Yeah.
So now, granted, it's very possible. I mean, the Event 201, extremely bizarre war game exercise, so to speak, that the Gates Foundation had talking about a coronavirus. I get that all those things exist, but so long as we're able to think clearly and see through it, well, then they can't fake us out, whether it's a real pandemic killing 100% of people or it's a nothing killing, 0.1%.
Yeah. And I've stayed kind of, I mean, at the very least, yes, I believe coronavirus is real. I don't know if anyone is saying that. I mean, there are people saying it doesn't exist at all, I'm sure, but I think it is real. I think it's a novel virus. I also think it was either manufactured or released at a certain time, or at the very least, I don't have definitive proof on this. I know Corbett has done a lot of good work when this was happening about what was happening in Wuhan at the time, and a lot of, it seemed like, foreknowledge in a certain way. I'll put a link in the show notes page to that. But at the very least, yeah, it was just, it's been taken advantage of. In
Well, yeah, and South China University did a study, and it more or less said that the closest horseshoe bat colony to the wet markets is like 800 kilometers. But where the virus was released was extremely close to a Wuhan lab where this very thing was being studied. So whether it's intentional or accidental, um, you know,
yeah,
even if it was accidental, I don't know. I know that accidents can happen when there's, little accountability and coercive funding. So maybe it was that. Maybe it was intentional. Certainly, bioweapons are not above the state. I mean,
hmm
Tuskegee experiment, Unit 731. This is, one of their go-tos for the elites. I have no clue, but yeah, certainly the morons who just take that off the table. Oh, I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson. Oh, this could never happen. And Matt Dillahunty, the weakest skeptics on the planet.
So you had mentioned the Melania tapes a little bit earlier, and I don't know what that is. Was that a scandal that was kind of might be covered up by Trump having corona?
And that's the funny thing. So let me read off to you one of the Melania tapes. So this is a private conversation between her and a friend from July of 2018. That's why I thought it was an October surprise, because if it had happened, September 29th, it wouldn't have been. The fact that they sat on this for a year and a half, much like they sat on Trump's, um, you know, uh, conversation with Bush about grabbing women, um, and the other one, and they also tried it with Trump's taxes, but I can't imagine that really lost him any votes. Give me a second, or I just want to pull these up because there are a number of quotes here. She more or less was talking about, oh, it's so annoying having to uh, decorate the White House during Christmas time, and people are mentioning, these kids in cages. Like, who gives an F? They didn't care about it when Obama was president. So the clip is kids in cages. Who gives an F? And it looks really bad. But the reality is she is expressing her hatred for the double standard, not that she likes seeing kids in cages. I think she came from a poor immigrant background as well. But when I search Melania tapes, I can't find any quotes. That's how uh, that's how polluted Twitter is with Trump having COVID. So whatever,
Yeah.
people will find it.
Yeah, well, I just didn't know what it was even at all, what the scandal was. So, well, as we get closer here to election day, and I don't know if you wanted to touch on, what do you think about this mail-in voting stuff? I mean, are we going into a situation that might get violent, perhaps? Do you think?
Well, there's been violence for the last 3 months based on a BLM false narrative. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that an actual vote that exists would likely cause violence or people to resist the outcome. The election wouldn't surprise me at all. As far as mail-in goes, my whole thing is if you're at the poll and you vote, it drastically increases the likelihood that it's accurate as opposed to when it's mailed. And now, when it's being mailed, that gives rise to hundreds of different factors that previously didn't exist when you were at the poll itself. So the number of things that could go wrong just strikes me as they could be fraudulent, they could be destroyed, a lot could go missing. Um, and the Ilhan Omar thing that came out certainly was damning. In her defense, she got 78% of the vote in Minnesota, but that does not address a number of things. For example, this is a pattern in Minnesota. Al Franken, according to usnews.com, Al Franken may have won his Senate seat through voter fraud. This was back in the year 2010 that they were talking about voter fraud in Minnesota. Now, MIT did a study. Voting by mail increases the use and reliability of mail-based voting options. the executive summary says more or less 3.9. 3.9 million ballots can go missing. An MIT study says 3.9 million absentee ballots requested were never mailed to the voter. So, look, it increases the number of variables. It's much less likely you're going to get an accurate outcome. State's illegitimate anyways, but I think this is just a funny thing that the one mechanism you have for it's legitimate because we vote, and then it's like totally not counted accurately.
Right.
It's more sad than anything else, but yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I was thinking in preparation for this show to kind of talk about the religion of voting, how it's kind of a religious ceremony in the past. So it seems interesting that at this point in time, we're really having a lot of doubts surrounding the legitimacy of elections. My thought is, are we entering an age when it's just the nature of everything with technology? It sheds doubt on the process, how we're getting a reliable, legitimate election, when in the past, maybe we never had legitimate elections that were accurate and untampered. And now we just know about it because technology is so pervasive.
I've always wondered that, like when the votes were counted, what if the news just reported the opposite of what happened? I mean, how it's not like people would be saying, let me go back and do the voting. It's like you're working 10-hour days in the 1800s. I mean, what are the checks and balances? So it does, once you realize how little accuracy there can be in finding the truth regarding, something like voting, it just opens your mind up to, oh my God, this could be really bad.
Yeah. Well, if a democracy only, I say democracy loosely, the democratic process, the idea of people voting, if it makes you think about how unstable of a system it is, how unstable of a system of government it is, if all we have to do is shed doubt on its legitimacy and accuracy, the whole thing blows up. I mean, what is going to happen if the election happens and you just get two sides who think that their candidate won or is condemning the results of the election? I'm thinking just total chaos and panic. We've seen this play out in Iraq, in Afghanistan, as they're trying to establish new governments and people are getting attacked on the way to the polls. How are people like the Pashtun, for example, I don't know if they ever actually participated in the elections, but how are they supposed to have legitimacy in it? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to go to a Supreme Court decision just because everything can be contested and contested and contested until it hits the Supreme Court. And then they make the final decision. But even then, what if the masses don't accept it? And, by that, I pretty much only mean the leftists. I can't even see the right having, even if they, thought Trump was justly elected, to see them stand down to the state with regard to the Breonna Taylor thing. I think the conservative right is just under such a hypnotic trance about the justification for when the state is acting out of its morally justified role. I don't see them resisting at all.
Yeah, that's a very, makes me think a little bit. I don't know. At the same time, I do think that, well, it all depends on whether or not the right thinks that it's legitimate. And I think that if they think it's illegitimate and Biden won by an underhanded, with all this voter fraud or whatever, I don't think so. I don't think they would just go into the night. Maybe does that go against what you're saying?
Yeah, but I mean, it's hard to predict people's behavior when the state has them under mind control.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, riots over George Floyd, no one knows who Kelly Thomas is. I mean, or no one knows who Tony Timpa is, the guy who was killed under similar circumstances. The Kelly Thomas murder was also on tape, and it was way worse.
Yeah.
And he's crying out for his mother, and the cops went to trial and got off.
Yeah.
So this is way worse than anything that might potentially occur with George Floyd and then Duncan Lemp and Breonna Taylor. So when you literally see that the media exists to issue opinions to the masses, that the Prussian education system has designed them not to see through. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's really difficult.
Well, and with Kelly Thomas, have you ever seen that courtroom picture? This is a wonderful exhibit used by his attorneys that were representing him. That poster board that had in red, "Please stop," like 37 times, counting the number of times he said these things. Like, "I'm sorry," 40 times. It's and what was the one where the man was shot in the hotel? He was in the
Oh, the
hotel hall.
Daniel Schaefer. That was
Yeah.
actually by Mark Victor, who is a great attorney for freedom in Arizona. He's done some excellent work with helping clients. I don't think he won the Steven Anderson the Steven Anderson trial, but he was up against U.S. Border Patrol, so that's pretty difficult. But yeah, they just told Anderson, "Get out of your car. We smell drugs." Even though they don't, they did the same thing to me when I went to California. I wasn't even going to a different country. They had us get out, had the dog, go around. They did the same thing to my dad coming back from Mexico. So yeah, this is just routine tyranny that the state engages in. Thankful for guys like Victor and you in the law field.
Yeah, our firm has done some of that work actually, but so kind of lost my train of thought here. But so as we're going into the election, I wanted to ask you what you think about. You mentioned the Prussian education system, but that kind of plays into when Europe transitioned from monarchies kind of around World War I and into this democratic system, this modern era of it, and it gets on and it touches on why is it necessary for the populace to view the government as themselves, because as we read in Anatomy of the State, I think it's really enlightening that it's very important for the modern state apparatus to have its citizens think that the government is them.
I love how Anatomy of the State's one of those it's just like a biblical verse. It was
Yeah.
Anatomy of the State, chapter 1, verse 31. It's just so great to reference so often that it constantly fits. I think it's important that primarily people see the state as a unique institution insofar as it is an extension of themselves and exists in nature almost to preserve order. Because when people are angry at it, they are quite literally angry at an idea. It's hard to hold the politicians accountable. It's hard to hold the police accountable. Well, they're just following orders. Well, the politicians were voted in. Well, the voters only get to vote once every 4 years. So you end up in this sort of limbo of no accountability at all. The reality is the people who follow the orders and the people who issue them are totally responsible 100% for their actions. Seeing the state as an extension of you drastically decreases the likelihood you will criticize it, because much like you see your own child in, the best light ever, oh, they could do no wrong, my child would never lie, you sort of think that about your own government, because any criticism of that government, people will assume is a criticism of them. You think we faked the moon landing? You're 5 years older than me. What do you mean we? You were not around in 69, nor were you a part of NASA. And that's not an actual conversation I had. That was me actually watching two guys debate recently. Or they'll say, you think we torture? You think we lie about invading countries? The fact that they see them and the people who rule them as the same is so incredible that you need something like democracy pushed through the education system. Because they would never do that with any of. They're able to say, here are the people who participated, and here are the non-participants. They're the ones who are guilty of whatever this is. But when it's the state, they take it personally. You think we were involved in A, B, and C? We would never do that. You're not part of them. So the ability to blur line between the individual and the state, I think, is vital to people justifying state atrocities and totally ignoring them and having no incentive to call them out and recognize them as illegitimate.
Yeah, and it gives that illusion of consent. Rothbard touches on that, but it's on its face, it's just a ridiculous idea. And there's the famous example he uses that if we are the state and the state is us, then 7 million Jews didn't die in the Holocaust. They weren't murdered. They just committed suicide.
Exactly. And right away you're able to see, but unfortunately you have to talk about other countries, and then the other country people know about, and that example is usually like, National Socialist Germany or something like that.
Of
So
course.
it's unfortunate we have limited examples, but when you start talking about King Leopold, people aren't exactly on the same page with you.
Right.
But yeah, exactly. And the National Socialist government was elected, whereas, the Allied powers, Churchill was appointed, Stalin wasn't elected, and FDR ran 4 times when he was only supposed to run 2.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not exact. Once you start pointing that stuff out, people will recognize, well, voting has nothing to do with the legitimacy. It's the actual actions that they undertake. So that, again, the very important aspect.
Well, and then I have an article here, and I know that you have a lot of quotes too that we're going to touch on. But let me try and pull this up. Okay, so on the screen now, you can't see it. Sorry, Keith. But it's an article on the Mises Institute called "Why Vote," and it's published by Mark Brandley. He was the author, and it kind of goes through and it smashes some of these common misconceptions that people have when it comes to voting. And it just strikes me as how when you present the numbers like this, like he does in this article, it really destroys any thought that your vote matters. And so he starts, in my recent How to Win an Election, I made the point that, quote, your vote doesn't matter. Given some of the responses to the statement, I would like to provide further explanation. Consider what it means to say your vote doesn't matter. Your vote does matter if it affects the outcome of the election in question. How this could happen depends on the number of votes tallied. If there is an even number of voters in an election, your vote only matters if it creates a tie and your candidate goes on to win the election. If you didn't vote, your candidate would have lost by 1 vote. In such a case, because of your vote, your candidate's odds of winning increase from 50% to from 0% to roughly 50%. On the other hand, if there are an odd number of voters, your vote matters if it breaks the tie that would have occurred without your vote. In such a case, your candidate's odds of winning increase from about 50% to 100%. Now here's the kicker. The chance of either one of these occurrences depends on the number of voters in the election, among other issues. Adding this all up, the odds of your vote making a difference are approximately 1 over n, where n is the number of voters in the election. According to this estimate, in an election with 100 million voters, the chance of a single vote affecting the outcome of the election would be about 1/1,000,000th of 1%. And then he gets into the Electoral College, and there's a bunch more statistics here. But anything that jumps out to you, Keith?
Yeah, I would love to rub this in the face of the Michael Shermers of the world and the Neil deGrasse Tysons when they say, be real, let's use common sense here, let's
Right.
use science. And then we actually have a scientific approach that the author gives. The Journal of the American Medical Association confirms Donald Reldemer and Robert Tashari examined the traffic-related deaths during polling hours on election days compared to the number of deaths on the 2 Tuesdays before and after the election in the last 30 days. They found that the election day average of 158 deaths to be 18% higher than the average death rate on the other days. You are more likely to die going to the polls. And then you see the Ilhan Omar videos of the ballot harvesting, and it's like, oh gosh, well, even if I mail it in and I save myself from going to the polls, well, who knows what's happening here. So yeah, painting that picture really brings it to reality. So under like no other circumstance would this be legitimate, to quote Jason Brennan in one of the greatest books that I've read in philosophy. By the way, we have an anarchist professor published by Princeton University. This guy is terrific. He says, the problem with political decisions isn't that most of us don't get our own way. It's also that these decisions are usually imposed on us against our will by threats of violence. Democracy, as we practice it, is unjust. We expose innocent people to high degrees of risk because we put their fate in the hands of ignorant, misinformed, irrational, biased, and sometimes immoral decision makers. So when you see that, not only does it count for your vote count for very little, it also is a 1 in a million vote amongst people who are totally wrong, totally immoral, and have no justification for their beliefs. So it's so discouraging when you see people see that as the mechanism which achieves a justified government.
Well, it's wrapped up too in this. I remember, and I've made a point on the podcast so many times to make the point that America is not a democracy. And at what point, it's around the progressive era that people start referring to America as that of the United States as a democratic country, and we have these democratic institutions when it's not. I mean, if it were a democracy, it'd be one man, one vote on each policy, correct?
Yeah, that would, well, democracy is rule by the people, I think is like the origin. So that could be determined well, that could be through a representative determined by the people or directly determined by them. It's difficult, but yeah, as far as the main principles in democracy is mass involvement with the average Joe, not necessarily a good thing. I don't look at my computer, fan, router, microphone, cell phone, and say, God, I wish there had been a vote on how to make this. It's like, thank God, only the best minds were involved in this. It was voluntarily funded, and I can opt out, and there's competition and private property. That's how we get good results, not not voting on nonsense and introducing. Well, we need more ignorant people who've done no research on this topic to be involved heavily. That's the worst thing you can do.
And vote by emotion. And I saw it as in terms of like democracy versus republicanism, where I understand republicanism to be a limited government based on a constitutional system where you vote for representatives or representatives are appointed. And so I see it as existing on a spectrum where maybe on this side is democracy and on the right side is republicanism. And do you feel once we got rid of the direct election of senators, or how did that happen now? I
think it was the appointment of senators
right.
that originally happened.
And then we went to a direct election of senators, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I hope that's right. And then, but so we've just crept more and more in the direction of democracy, and then they start using this, and then democracy becomes a euphemism for everything that's all and good in the world. And I love challenging people's this belief in democracy, that they say it without thinking about it. Democracy is everything good in the world. And I always say, well, okay, so two wolves and a sheep are going to vote over what's for dinner, I think is the best way that I can put it. And a lot of people haven't heard of that before or heard that presented.
Oh, yeah. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell vote on what to do with Virginia Roberts. I mean, it's so unjust when you look at it under any other circumstance. Turns out Walmart took a vote, and now you have to work for them indefinitely, but in 4 years you'll get a 1 in 100 million chance at getting out of this labor. By the way, Walmart counts the votes. I mean, it's so ridiculous on its face that we just have to take whatever they say for the state, apply it to any other organization. They're like, what? That's ridiculous. So, it's good that we have truth on our side. I do like this part of the article where he says, he addresses, if you don't vote, you can't complain. What they really mean, to give them a more favorable explanation of what their emotions are trying to get out through language, is if you do not participate when you have the ability to participate and affect change, and you actively choose not to do so, you have no morally justified recognition or legitimacy in criticizing the outcome that you chose to not participate in. How do you respond to that?
Well, I like the way that George Carlin responded to it. And I think this is the same point, and I wonder if he got it from George Carlin or where that sentiment originated. But George Carlin is right, is that if you did vote, you can't complain, because either you voted for the person that brings about this policy, or you voted in an election and therefore passively legitimized it by participating in it and had the outcome. And I'll propose this question to you. Are you a libertarian that thinks that voting is violence, or are you against voting on principle, that it violates the NAP, or that I just want your take on that.
No, voting is not violence. If it were violence, I'd be morally justified in shooting someone in the head as they go to vote.
I agree. Yeah.
So I am not morally justified in doing that. What it does is it introduces an amount of legitimacy to the existence of the status system. Now, this is also done all the time whenever my grandma says, Keith, if the cops ever pull you over, you have to do exactly what they tell you. It's the law. I go, that is her making that comment in front of 10 people is worse than voting because it perpetuates the idea of state legitimacy in the minds of the masses, as does saying the pledge, as does saying the national anthem, as does tuning into the debates that get 80 million people watching the night of. What if no one watched? What if they threw a government and no one came, and they threw an election and no one came? Well, yeah, eventually those are all things that add to the state's legitimacy. Voting is not violence, but it is like oh, that's what you participate in, kind of thing. No, it doesn't violate the non-aggression principle. Is it counterproductive? Look, I'm glad Thomas Massie and Rand Paul are in Washington D.C. I'm glad Ron Paul was there as well. I'm glad Louis T. McFadden and Larry McDonald had been there previously. So, yeah, we are able to get some wins, but it's just not one of my bigger priorities because, as we mentioned, vote matters very little, and it's in a pile of other votes that cancel you out to the tune of millions from a bunch of other ignorant people.
So one thought that I wanted you to riff off of, throw it your way, is that I don't want to put you on the spot, but are you going to vote in this election? Because I'm undecided personally. I don't.
No, I'm not, and that's because, well, I don't want to get into it while we're recording.
Yeah.
No, I'm not able to. I probably wouldn't be able to, but yes.
Okay, and sorry to put you on the spot, but
no, that's fine. I have no problem. No problem saying that.
And I don't know if I'm going to or not, but some common things that I've heard is, okay, well, yes, they're both bad, but one is not as bad as the other. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I really don't pin people for that. I mean,
No?
sometimes you're just buying time. It's like, all right, would you rather tyranny be here in Malice says conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit. I'd rather have 100 years of freedom and then slavery versus, immediate slavery, because at least you had a glorious holiday, as Hans Hoppe likes to say. And even though, the reality is that when you have a Republican president, you don't have Democrats saying we need to stop spending, so spending increases more. What they really want is the left or the opposition to not control the narrative. The president said this. People aren't really worried about what Hillary has to say now because she didn't win. Because Trump did win, well, he gets the center of attention for the next 4 or 8 years. And that is sort of what they're voting for. I think they love how Trump sort of hates their enemies and says to the media isn't going to report, well, Keith Knight said that he hates Chris Cuomo. This is a breaking story. But they are going to say, Trump said this about Cuomo. And it's like, yeah, that's my guy. That's what I've been wanting to say to Cuomo and Don Lemon and all these SOBs who just constantly lie about us. And when you're getting called racist nonstop by the media just for being white or sexist for being male, or let's say you are seen as even as a moocher by Fox News because you're an you're an illegal immigrant, well, I could see you wanting something to counteract that. So I don't blame people for voting for the lesser of two evils at all.
What about if you vote for the third-party candidate, in this case Joe Jorgensen, you're taking a vote away from Trump in a lot of cases. That's what I've heard.
Well, Trump doesn't deserve any votes. The mass murder campaign that he supports in Yemen, he is not that alone. We don't even need to get into the drug war that he perpetuates. And look, man, this is another case for lesser of two evils. He had the First Step Act, I think it's called, or criminal justice reform. He had some good deregulation. I still hate him. I think he's totally evil in his justification. But he does this odd thing where he calls out the military-industrial complex every now and then, by name, literally. So he's tough to crack. But I don't blame people for voting for him. I don't blame people for saying 100 years from now, I want the future to know that there were libertarians. So I'm throwing a chip in for Jorgensen. Don't blame him for that either.
Yeah, I like your take, and I'm glad I got to talk to you about it too, because in a way I haven't solidified my thoughts on this, but you make really good points as usual. But so the other thing is that I'm not necessarily, I think that, like, okay, so if you're going to vote, if you have to vote, it's probably better to vote in your local elections, because instead of it being 1 over 100 million, it's maybe 1 over 400. So do you like those odds better? I mean, still
Yeah.
abysmal odds, but yeah.
I love going to the meetings and talking to people,
Yeah.
just because the fact that that we exist increases the likelihood that people will see our ideas as legitimate. When you hear something the first time, it's like, oh, that's a weird, bizarre thing. But the second, third, fourth, and fifth time, you're like, okay, this might actually be something that, I mean, a lot of people believe this. That's what's loosely referred to as the social proof principle that Robert Cialdini, the psychologist, I think he's a psychologist from Arizona State, really made popular, that people will drastically think that something is more valuable when more people like it. Which, I mean, that's sort of how I choose to buy things. I didn't do too much. I can't even pronounce the name of this printer right here, but I got it and it works fine because other people had it and it seemed to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of just going there and asking libertarian questions, being unapologetic. I'm a libertarian. Here's why I'm against the state. You know, everyone's going to raise their eyebrows at you. But the fact that anyone knows what a libertarian is, when, you know, there were 15 ANCAPs in 1963, as I constantly mention, but it's so important to remember how far we've come. Yeah, I love doing that. I had Bill Montgomery, who is the former Attorney General of Arizona, and I got into a nice little fight with him in a committee on the drug war, and that was fun. One of our friends who, I don't know if he wants me to say this, but he got into a fight with Bill Montgomery over civil asset forfeiture, and he just crushed him. So Montgomery goes, well, oh God, what? I'm glad it wasn't on tape, because he wouldn't have done this if it wasn't on tape. Montgomery was like, well, civil asset forfeiture, that's the law, you know? And our friend goes, okay, so you, Mr. Conservative Bible thumper, you think rights come from government and not God, our creator? And this guy did not. It was the first time this arrogant prick paused and goes, well, it's important to find a balance between our natural rights and what we as a society decide to do. I mean, it was the perfect mind control MK Ultra response that he gave. But it's fun to just inject those into the populace and get to talk to people and see where they're at intellectually.
Yeah. It kind of, well, it does kind of remind me of, there was that interview that Bernie Sanders had where there's a lot of these interviews, and I can't think of exactly who was interviewing him, but
Jan Helfeld?
It might have been, he pinned him in that intellectual corner where, like, what gives a police officer the right to do something that I can't do? I don't know if, was that the question? Do you recall?
So Helfeld, Jan Helfeld, the objectivist. He was like, should the government protect people who want to forcefully take their property? And Bernie I think he saw what was going on, like, right away. He goes, I want to know who you work for. Who are you with? I don't know what your angle is here. It's like, you know what? This is one of the amazing things where they're like, democracy is about, you know, you working together and then building up until you get to your representative, and then you persuade him. You say, we're going to threaten you and throw you out, and then he has to vote the way you do, or is incentivized to do so. It really is a red pilling moment when you're like, all right, I am with a congressperson. This is almost as high as it gets. And he has no interest in answering your question at all. Zero. Could not care less. Dodges the question, stands up, leaves the room. And then you could see off camera when he thinks they're not recording, he goes, I want to know who you work for, again and again. And now that it's been 20 years, he still does this is by the Koch brothers. He still has no principled argument for any of his ideas. It's always, I associate them with this group. I attack this group. just by attacking them. Not even he doesn't even give us a list of why we should hate the Kochs or anything else. So yeah, that is the interview, and that's one of the great ones, along with his Nancy Pelosi interview on the minimum wage. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We'll have to
Yeah.
put when I'm going through, I'll make work for myself, but I'll try and find that and put it in the show notes page. But that's like the moment in with the NPC meme where the eyebrows go down, the eyebrows furrow. So you walk them into that logical corner, and then yeah, the eyebrows go down. So I know that you had some things that we were going to take a look at, Keith, as well, that go on voting. Any other thoughts before we dive into that?
I just want to get into a couple more Jason Brennan points there. Now, people know this, but it's hard to process. So I just want to touch on page 25 of Against Democracy by Jason Brennan. He says, I could write an entire book just documenting how little voters know. But since many others have already done that, I'll only offer a few examples. During election years, most citizens cannot identify any congressional candidate in their district. Citizens generally don't know which party controls Congress. Immediately before the '04 presidential election, almost 70% of U.S. citizens were unaware that Congress had added a prescription drug benefit to Medicare, though this was a giant increase to the federal budget and the largest new entitlement program since President Johnson began the war on poverty. Virtually no one knew about the troubled asset relief package. They had heard of bailouts, but they didn't know about it. They didn't read the bill, which is the whole idea. Well, you read the bill and then you criticize it, and then your congressman has to change his mind. None of that actually happens. Americans vastly overestimate how much money is spent on foreign aid, and so many of them mistakenly believe we can significantly reduce the budget by cutting foreign aid. 73% of Americans do not understand what the Cold War was about. 40% of Americans do not know whom the United States fought in World War II. Now, that means they could probably name the National Socialists in Germany, but not Imperial Japan and their access with Benito Mussolini. Let alone could they give a reason, let alone could they give how we can avoid this issue in the future. So it's so ridiculous. He goes on to say, um, what voting does is it helps them root for their team against the hated rivals. This is really where the emotion of voting really comes from. Going on to say, some think democracy is valuable the way a painting is. We should value it for what it expresses or symbolizes. So, once we've defeated you have a 1 in 125 million in the presidential election, assuming they count the votes. Well, what it does is it symbolizes. We should think of democracy the way a person values a hammer as an end in and of itself. He goes into that, but what we need to realize is voting for something doesn't improve its overall quality, just as there should have been people voting on how to write this book. No, it's much better that it was a voluntary monarchy or anarcho-capitalist approach to writing a book. And then he ends with this one. Politics threatens an ideal of mutual respect and regard. So just as if there was state religion, we'd constantly be fighting over who controls the state so your religion isn't imposed on anyone. We're always going to be fighting. I don't see it dying down. I think it's only going to escalate or more or less plateau from where it is now, because you're always involved in initiating aggression against peaceful people with your ideas versus theirs. So we can put down our swords just like we do for religious freedom when it comes to economic freedom and any other aspect of life.
Yeah, well, I think we accomplished what we set out to do with this episode. We've never covered this before, I don't think, on our pod. I'm trying to think back to everything.
I don't think so either. So do you have any comments on Brennan's Against Democracy? I just got two other things that I want to read because I don't want to just bash voting and then leave people. I got somewhat of a solution here.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I was going to share this one thought that at a certain point in time with the show, I convinced myself that it would be better, aside from voting, to call your representative and to tell their office not to do something. So I think it's probably a little more effective than just voting, but when it looked like we were on the brink of war with Iran and there were Tomahawk missiles being launched, I called up my representatives in quotes, because Tom Woods has a great piece about, is it The Tale of the Slave? But Tom Woods also had a good one about the impossibility of the myth of political representation. Like, for instance, I'm a lawyer. When someone hires me, I have to do what they say.
Yeah.
And as long as that the representation period happens. But if you vote for someone and they're your representative, do they really represent you if you have no control over what they do? And why do we have the double standard? Why does true representation exist all the time in the legal field? If there's a fiduciary duty, or doctors have duties to their patients, so why does that just go out the window? And is it The Tale of the Slave, where in which cases, I guess that's in which case is this person not a slave? But there's a similar one where I don't know if he goes through it in that one. Is that Nozick?
Yeah, so Nozick wrote the tale in Anarchy, State, and Utopia. I'm not sure. I know that Woods has bashed this a number of times in his book Meltdown, where he uses the example of Dianne Feinstein. He cites the New York Times article, got, I think, 10,000 calls on TARP, the bailouts, and 97%, I think, was the number of people who outright opposed it, and she voted for it. And she's still there to this day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the idea that, she's shaking in her boots, that's just not the reality, which doesn't mean it's inherently illegitimate, because in the non-political realm, it's sometimes good that you can't affect what other people do. The difference, obviously, as we know, is it's with money and property you voluntarily acquired. So the big deal no longer exists. It's your stuff.
Yeah. And well, I thought that when I called maybe her staffers, and I've heard this from people before who have worked in congressional offices, state senators and whatnot, but they say, well, for every person that calls, we figure there's 200 or 300 people that feel the same way that didn't call, or something like that. So of course it doesn't affect the end result. And I think a few weeks later I got a letter from my representatives, and it said, well, I certainly understand that individuals are concerned with foreign relations. However, Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terror, and so I was like, all right, yeah, sounds great.
Exactly. Yeah. So they have to simultaneously say, you matter. You should be involved in all this other stuff. But the reality is that they don't have the information on, I don't know, healthcare, education, the environment, technology, the documents of what's going on in Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia, China. You don't know this, and that's okay that you don't know. That's why the division of labor is so valuable in a society where there's private property, free trade, and the ability to discriminate and not associate with people who are behaving poorly. So it gives them an incentive. Look, Marco Rubio would probably be a good, productive member of society if there wasn't this thing he could occupy and have people who can't think straight but vote him in and abide by him. So, of course, first thing that comes out, Trump gets COVID. He goes, any of our adversaries who see this as a weakness, well, we will not back down just because our president is, ill. The amazing thing is they've so gaslit us with regard to everything else. If there was a legitimate attack against America for blowback causes, we would have no way of determining whether or not it was true. Anything the CIA is involved in, come on, killing bin Laden and throwing his body in the ocean. Scott Horton's been on my show. He says that he has Seymour Hersh as an accurate source on that. But that is the exact thing you would expect them to do and, provide no evidence for. They finally catch this guy we've been after for 20 years, even though CNN and ABC were able to get a hold of him. The poor CIA couldn't get a hold of him. And then they finally kill him and throw him in the. It's so ridiculous. So, yeah, you know what? I am actually going to stop there. I say we make a second episode on solutions.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah, and that gives us a reason to do another show in maybe a week or so.
Sounds good.
Yeah, all right.
Happy to see you again, brother.
Yeah, you too, man. And why don't you go through and plug all the sources? I know I've linked to your show lots in the past, but just go ahead.
You know what? I'm only gonna plug one. That's because if I plug 10, no one's gonna do anything. They'll be paralyzed and overwhelmed. Please check out my library account. It'll be right in the description here. It's such a great alternative to YouTube. It's constantly improving. Minds.com is also improving. I don't even want to mention two. Just library. Please get me there so I at least have a soft place to land once the account gets taken down. My video, I get notifications all the time. My video, Why They Hate Us, was restricted. One of the most appropriate things I've ever put up online, restricted. So yes, please check that out. Pat, good to talk to you again, brother.
Yeah, you too. And before we go, my wife and I'd be remiss if I didn't plug this, but my wife and I started a show together. It's been very enjoyable to do that with her. It is Unhallowed. It's at unhallowedpodcast.com. We met in Gothic horror fiction class at the University of Minnesota, and we fell in love, but we review classic works of Gothic horror. And so if you want a little break from the hysteria, go and check that out. So we just got approved to iTunes. But it's really great to see you, Keith. I'm really looking forward to talking to you again. And yeah, until next time.
Take care, man. Bye.